Today, we're going to break down the official report on the Meron disaster, which was, one of Israel's worst ever civil tragedies. And we're not going to bury the lead here. We're going straight to its most talked about conclusion, that former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu bears personal responsibility for what happened. So let's get right into it.
Okay, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll hit you with that bombshell conclusion from the report. Then, we'll kind of rewind to understand what actually happened at Mount Meron. After that, we'll dig into how so many warnings were ignored for years, look at the really divisive debate this is all kicked off, and then we'll wrap up by talking about what this all means for the future.
All right, so let's just dive right into the heart of it. In March 2024, the State Commission of Inquiry dropped its final report. And believe me, its main findings sent absolute shockwaves through the entire political system.
But before we get into any of the politics, the reports, the debates, I really think it's crucial we just pause and look at this number. 45. Let that sink in for a second. That's the number of men and boys who lost their lives. That's the human cost at the center of all this. And it's exactly why this investigation was so critical. So here it is, the core finding. The State Commission, and this was led by a former Supreme Court President, Meron, so it's a big deal. They concluded that Benjamin Netanyahu, who was prime minister for years and years leading up to this, holds personal responsibility for the tragedy that unfolded.
And you might be asking, okay, but on what grounds? Well, this is the reasoning, straight from the commission's report. They said, quote, Netanyahu knew or should have known that the site is not safe. The report is basically saying, look, this danger wasn't some big secret. And as the head of government, he either knew about it or, it was his job to know about the life-threatening conditions there. So what exactly happened on that day?
To really get the weight of that finding, we have to go back to what actually happened on that day. So let's do a quick recap of the event itself, because, it's the context for everything else we're going to talk about. So it was April 30th, 2021. During the massive annual pilgrimage for Lag BaOmer at Mount Meron, a horrific crowd crush happened in this one really narrow, sloping passageway. The pressure was just immense, and it became one of the deadliest peacetime disasters in Israel's history. The place was just dangerously overcrowded. The safety measures were basically non-existent, and it led directly to the deaths of those 45 men and boys. But here's the real kicker, and what the report makes devastatingly clear. This wasn't some freak accident that came out of nowhere. The inquiry shows that this disaster was the tragic and maybe even inevitable result of years and years of ignored warnings. I mean, just look at this timeline. This goes all the way back to 2008, when officials were already formally talking about safety problems. Then, for the next decade plus, you have report after report from professional groups all saying the exact same thing. Mount Meron was a ticking time bomb, a danger to human life. And still, nothing fundamental was ever fixed. And that really brings us to the crucial point the commission made. They're saying Netanyahu's responsibility wasn't about one single bad call. It was about inaction. The argument is that by not making the safety of the site a real priority, by not pushing the government ministries to actually fix the problems, he essentially just allowed this incredibly dangerous situation to fester, year after year, right up until the moment it exploded into tragedy. So, as you can probably guess, dropping a finding like this on a former and current prime minister, it kicked off a massive public and political debate. And the whole thing really boils down to one question. What does responsibility even mean here? Now, the commission was super precise with its wording here, and this is important. They used the term personal responsibility, but, and this is a big but, they did not recommend any criminal charges. That's a really critical distinction. They defined it as a failure of his public duty, the duty a leader has to see major risks coming and do something about them. It's not about breaking a law, it's about a failure of leadership.
And that distinction is really at the heart of the two big arguments you hear now. On one side, people say, look, this was a systemic failure, a total breakdown across tons of government ministries and the police over decades. It's just not fair to pin all that on one person. But then the other side, which is basically the commission's view, says, well, hold on. A prime minister's ultimate job is to oversee and fix those exact kinds of systemic failures, especially when people's lives are on the line.
And that really brings us to the bigger picture, the report's wider purpose. This wasn't just about pointing fingers for something that already happened. It's really about sending a clear, powerful message for the future about how government should work and how we protect people. In fact, The report itself says its findings should be a warning sign. And that's a warning sign for every single public official out there. It's basically putting everyone on notice that, hey, you will be held accountable, not just for what you do, but for what you fail to do when you know there's a danger.
So when you boil it all down, what are the big lessons here? Well, first, that leaders have a moral duty to act when they know about a risk. Second, that you can't just wish away systemic problems. It takes real, determined leadership to fix them. Third, that keeping the public safe isn't just some item on a checklist. It's one of the most basic jobs of a government. And finally, that accountability is the thing that makes sure these lessons actually stick.
Which leaves us with a really big question, right? This report lays out a powerful case for one version of public accountability, but it kind of opens up a bigger conversation for all of us. What does accountability really look like? And what's our role as citizens in making sure that the people in charge are held to that standard so that a tragedy like Meron can never, ever happen again?